Moscow's energy crisis is growing by the day. It is making great efforts to fill the gap created by the oil refineries that Ukraine has been attacking for weeks. People in large settlements such as Moscow, Smolensk and Saratov can now only buy 10 liters of gasoline per day. This situation is beginning to test the patience of the Russian people. However, Vladimir Putin's attempts to remedy the situation continue to fall flat. As a last resort to solve the fuel crisis, Putin placed his trust in Alexander Lukashenko. But once again, the mountains Putin trusted were covered in snow. The last hope fuel train that set off from Russia's ally Belarus never reached its destination. At a simple level crossing near Smolensk, it collided with a truck and, along with the millions of liters of gasoline it was carrying, turned into a huge fireball. This disaster is not just the loss of 12 tanker cars and their valuable cargo. It is proof that Putin's war machine can no longer sustain itself, that it cannot even perform the most basic logistical functions, and that the growing rebellion of the fuel-starved Russian people has become even more deadly than Ukrainian missiles. The Russian state media's attempt to present the incident as a simple truck collision at a level crossing and claim that there were no casualties cannot hide how shameful the truth is. This may be an accident, but the conditions that led to this accident show that the Russian state system as a whole has collapsed. Above all, this accident is a painful testament to the neglected and collapsing Russian domestic infrastructure, which has been deprived of resources due to the war. How else can one explain that the Minsk-Smolensk-Moscow railway line, which is of such strategic military importance in wartime, lacks even the most basic safety measures? Whether due to a malfunctioning level crossing signaling system, the absence of safety barriers, or the negligence of officials, this incident demonstrates that the state is unable to perform even its most basic function. The Kremlin can send hypersonic missiles to Ukraine, but it cannot safely pass the train carrying the fuel for those missiles through a simple level crossing on its own territory. This is a sign of complete incompetence for a modern state. Secondly, this incident has exposed how fragile Russia's logistics system is, and how dependent it is on a single route. This accident in Smolensk shut down the main railway line between Belarus and Russia for hours, even days. This halted not only fuel shipments, but also all military and civilian shipments passing through that line. This has painfully demonstrated that Russia's western logistics corridor is almost entirely dependent on a single country, namely Belarus, and that even the smallest disruption on this line, whether due to an accident or future partisan sabotage, could paralyze the entire front's supply capacity. Third, there is the military cost of the lost fuel. More than 12 derailed tanker cars mean hundreds of tons or millions of liters of gasoline. This amount means that thousands of military vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and supply trucks on the front will be immobilized for days, perhaps weeks. For an army already suffering from fuel shortages, this is an operational disaster. It presents Ukrainian forces with an invaluable window of opportunity to launch new offensives, while their enemy has lost its mobility. To understand why this train is a last hope, we need to recall the events of recent months. Ukraine has made a revolutionary change in its war strategy, targeting Russia's greatest strength and, at the same time, its greatest weakness, its energy infrastructure. With a series of successful long-range drone attacks, more than 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity was destroyed or severely damaged. This was not just industrial damage, it was a dagger to the heart of the Russian economy. The result of these attacks was an unprecedented fuel crisis within the country. Russia, once an energy exporter to the world, became unable to supply gasoline and diesel to its own people and army. The government was forced to completely ban gasoline exports until March 2026 to get the situation under control. But even this was not enough. From Crimea to Rostov, in all regions close to the southern front, kilometer-long queues began to form at gas stations. Prices skyrocketed. The agricultural sector couldn't find the diesel fuel needed for harvesting, while logistics companies cancelled their shipments. Most critically, tanks, armored vehicles, and supply trucks at the front faced the risk of losing their mobility. It was in this moment of desperation that Putin was forced to knock on the door of his small ally Belarus, which he normally subsidizes economically. This was a humiliating situation for a country claiming to be a superpower. Lukashenko was asked to make emergency fuel deliveries to supply Russia's northern front and critical logistics centers such as Smolensk. That train burning in Smolensk was the very embodiment of this humiliating call for help, this lifeline. This train carried not only fuel, but also the Kremlin's dwindling hopes. Another consequence of this disaster, at least as significant as the material damage, is the heavy blow it dealt to Putin's "everything is under control" propaganda. This incident contains all the elements necessary for a montage of shame. On the one hand, there are the images of Putin and his generals in those grandiose gilded meeting rooms, talking about Russia's power, invincibility, and ability to overcome any challenge. On the other, the hellish flames in Smolensk, the wagons turned into piles of molten metal, the toxic black smoke covering the sky, and the images of helpless firefighters trying to extinguish the flames. This is the humiliation of a superpower being forced to beg for fuel from its small neighbor at its most critical moment. This is the tragedy of that brotherly assistance failing to reach its destination. Destroyed by its own incompetence and decay. And most importantly, this is proof that the regime cannot even perform its most basic functions, that it cannot even fulfill its most fundamental responsibilities to its own people and its own army. Putin's last hope was destroyed by a truck driver at a broken level crossing. The propaganda itself burned and turned to ashes that night in Smolensk. The effects of this accident in Smolensk will be felt in the coming days and weeks, both on the front lines and within Russia itself, like a chain reaction. For Russian troops at the front, this means that the already existing fuel shortage will deepen and the operational tempo will come to a complete standstill. Commanders will be forced to order tank and armored vehicle crews to conserve fuel and avoid unnecessary movement. This means that an army will completely lose its initiative, becoming a static and defenseless target. For the civilian population within Russia, this disaster will further fuel fears that fuel will begin to be rationed. Queues at gas stations will grow longer, and black market prices will skyrocket. This situation will further increase the public's anger and frustration with the regime. There is also a cycle between market data and behavior on the ground. Quotas and queues reinforce the consumer's half-tank reflex. Drivers who normally fill up every 2 days come to the pump earlier and more often, worried that they might not find fuel. This inflates the station's hourly demand. If a new increase in wholesale prices is